Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for this will writing and estate planning workshop, which we are holding in conjunction with Geldards Solicitors. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Sarah Morgan Davis, and I am the Legacy and In-Memory Officer at the Development and Alumni Relations. And it is my pleasure today to be able to welcome you to this webinar. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. The session is being recorded and will be available after the event via the YouTube channel for the university. We will also send you a link. The Q&A function will be available once the presentation begins, should you wish to ask any questions. Many thanks to those of you who have submitted in advance. I know Laura, who is presenting today, is aiming to answer as many of them as possible within the presentation, and we will hopefully have some time at the end of the session to answer any additional queries. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Cardiff graduate Laura Ikin, who is an Associate Solicitor at Geldards, specialising in providing advice in relation to wills, lasting powers of attorney, trusts, tax and estate planning. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I'm on. I hope everyone can hear me. Hello, my name's Laura, and as Sarah said, I am a graduate of Cardiff. I studied law at Cardiff, and now I'm an associate solicitor at Geldards. There we go, slides are up. For those who don't know, Geldards is one of the UK's leading law firms. We have offices in Cardiff, London, and across the Midlands. And we provide advice on a broad range of areas to business clients, individuals, and bigger organisations as well. I specialise in private client matters, so that's wills, powers of attorney, trust and inheritance tax planning. And as Sarah said, this session is primarily focused on wills and things that individuals should consider when preparing a will. So I'm going to sound like Chris Whitty now and do next slide, please. If we were in person, I would be asking who here has a will and expect perhaps 50% of people to raise their hands. And my follow-up question is usually, have you reviewed it or even thought about it in the last 5 years? And a good amount of hands to probably go down at that point. So the starting point is, why do you need a will? It's the best way to give you peace of mind, and it's the only way really to ensure that your wishes are carried out in an appropriate way after your days and also in a tax efficient manner. Without a will, the intestacy rules apply. So these are on the next slide, and I've just summarised these. So if you were to die without a will in place, then these intestacy rules, which are government rules and legislation, sets out what happens after your days. You could leave behind a legal headache, which obviously involves solicitors' fees as well, possibly an unnecessary inheritance tax bill, and most importantly, perhaps what you actually wanted to happen after your days isn't the outcome. So even if you do have a will, it's really important that you keep it in place, because it's not something to do and just forget about, because things change and it's always worth keeping under review. So if we have a look at some of the myths that I hear an awful lot when I'm discussing wills with someone. I'm married, so my spouse will automatically inherit everything. We've been together years, so we're common law husband and wife. I live with my partner, but I'm not ready for a serious commitment. None of these are true. So if you're married, depending on the value of your estate and family setup, not everything might go to your spouse. It's not guaranteed. In terms of the second point, there's no such thing. You're either married or in a civil partnership, or you're not. And this has implications if a partner dies and hasn't provided for the surviving partner. And the third point, sorry, the slides are going a bit ahead of me. Third point is, if you die without a will and you haven't made provision for cohabitee, you could be leaving your estate open to a claim. And also it makes life really difficult for the surviving partner in terms of fighting for what they might be entitled to or what you might want to happen. So I've set out on the next slide what the intestacy rules are in a bit more detail. So if you're married and you have children, there's a restricted entitlement for your spouse. So your spouse will receive all your personal possessions, everything up to the first £270,000 of your estate. And then the remainder, whatever's above that 270,000, is divided between the spouse and children. So your children inherit part of the estate, which isn't ideal usually. If I could have the next slide, please. This sets out some other scenarios. So if there are no children and you are married, everything will pass to your surviving spouse. But the issue there is what happens if something happens to both of you together at the same time or in quick succession. The intestacy rules will apply then as to who gets, who benefits from your estate kind of going down the next generation. If you're a cohabiting partner and you die without a will, the surviving partner doesn't have any automatic entitlement to anything. And I know in some of the questions this cropped up, especially for heterosexual and same-sex couples, it would be this position. If you're not married and you don't make a provision in a will for your partner, it doesn't give them any right. Have to bring a claim against your estate to, for example, be able to continue living in the property. So there are assets on the next slide, please, that pass outside of the estate. So it's just important to be aware of this. Assets that are owned jointly, such as a property owned as joint tenants or joint bank accounts, automatically go to the survivor. And then most pensions, death in service benefit, and life insurance policies, provided they've you have a letter of wishes or expression of wishes naming the beneficiaries, and a life insurance policy is written into trust, it will actually usually pass outside of your estate and go directly to those named beneficiaries. So that's my next slide, please. So what is stopping you from making a will? So these are very common comments that I hear. My circumstances are complicated, it's difficult to decide what I want to do with my estate, things might change, we can't decide who we want as guardians for our children, it's something I'll get around to. And also, in terms of giving a legacy to charity or an organisation, that can prove a bit of a sticking point because people want to leave a legacy and you know, leave money to charity and do something philanthropic, but they don't know how, or they don't know who they want to benefit. So that can cause delays. Next slide, please. Thank you. A will is the best way to leave, speaking of charitable gifts, because that is something that comes up quite a lot in conversations. Your will is the best way to make sure that a charity or a cause close to your heart benefits after your days. And there's so many options that people aren't really aware of. Next slide. Research has shown that a person is far more likely to make a gift to charity or to an organisation close to their heart if a solicitor or if they've been advised that that's an option, because some people genuinely don't realise it is. Lots of people leave money to the big charities, you know, Cancer and Heart Foundation and you know, PDSA, etc. But it's so important to take advice and do your own research, because you can be as specific as you want. So you might well want to support those big charities in your will, but also I've had clients leave money to their local sports club or to set up a sponsorship fund or a book prize, for example. You could leave it to a smaller local charity or church. And organisations like the university and like other organisations all can be considered as beneficiaries of a gift of money in your will. And a lot of people don't realise that you can be quite general and give the money to the organisation and leave them to do what they see fit with it. Or you can be a bit more specific. So for example, with the university, if you know there's a specific research project that you would want to support, you can start speaking with, for example, Sarah and members of the team to discuss how you want your donation and gift to be used specifically. There are other benefits as well on the next slide of leaving a charitable gift. So it can save inheritance tax if your estate is subject to inheritance tax. And gifts to charities are exempt from inheritance tax. So it can be a beneficial thing to your estate. Also, if you leave 10% of your estate to charity, your estate can claim a reduced rate of inheritance tax. With that, it's really important to take advice around structuring that gift properly, because it's not as simple usually as just saying, oh, well, I leave 10% to X, Y, and Z charity. It needs to be done in a specific way. But if it is, it can be beneficial and it reduces the rate of inheritance tax from 40% to 36%. So on the next slide, here we go, the will planning process. So most people who come to me think that making a will is going to be long and drawn out and complicated and difficult to think about. And that's where I come in, and hopefully make it a bit easier. Honestly, it can be complicated, it can be a longer process sometimes, but that's usually if your circumstances are more complicated and require a bit more advice. And in that case, that's even more of a reason to actually do a will. Generally, in my experience, most clients who come to me say, actually, that wasn't that bad at all. So I'll take that as a compliment. And it generally isn't as bad an experience as I think people are expecting. But in terms of a process, it's not particularly difficult. We do a fact find around the value of your estate and what it's made up of. Basically, I get to be nosy and ask questions about your assets. And then it's really important, hence the picture, for you to tell me everything. Any skeletons that are in the closet, they need to come out, just to make sure that we can advise you fully. We need to understand your objectives, we need to understand your family, and we'll then consider a range of options, because it's not just a case of one will type fits all. You can make an informed choice, and then usually we'll draft the will and ensure that it's drafted appropriately and signed appropriately. So looking at the types of wills that we'll usually consider, if I could have the next slide, please. The starting point is usually a straightforward will. So lots of couples or lots of people will say, I just want to keep everything really straightforward, leave everything to my spouse, my partner, my children, other family or members or friends, and there's nothing wrong with keeping it as simple as that. Simple wills, especially when you're married, benefit from the transferable nil rate band. So from an inheritance tax point of view, they're nice and easy, but there are things to be aware of. So by leaving everything to the survivor of you, if you're in a couple, it leaves the entire estate vulnerable to the circumstances of the survivor. For example, if they remarried or went into care. By keeping it simple, if you're unmarried, there can be inheritance tax consequences. Also, if you leave everything outright to children without really giving it some thought and taking advice, it means children inherit quite a large sum at an inappropriate age. And also, if your estate is large and bearing an inheritance tax bill, it can make that bill pass down the generations, which could be avoided with a bit of planning. So speaking of inheritance tax, there's a summary on the next slide to cover it briefly. So inheritance tax is paid at a rate of 40%, and it's paid on everything above the nil rate band. Every individual has an allowance of 325,000 that they can leave inheritance tax free. And can I have that slide back? And then everything above that 325 is usually paid taxed at 40%. If you're married and you leave gifts to your spouse, they're exempt. I don't think that slide wants to stay on there. And you can transfer your nil rate bands between your spouses. So if one spouse dies, leaves everything to the other, on the death of the second spouse, they can claim double the nil rate band. So that's 650,000. On that slide, it also mentions the 7-year rule, and that applies to gifts that you make during your lifetime. So any gift that you make, and for example, if you gave £50,000 to each of your children, provided you live for 7 years from the date of that gift, it'll drop out of your estate. So I'll come on to this slide since it obviously wants to be shown. I think some of these scenarios came up in the questions that were posed. So these are common will planning dilemmas. So I'm worried my son will split from his wife, and then the inheritance gets swallowed up in divorce. Concerned my spouse will remarry and the children won't receive anything. Concerns about passing the family business down the line. Concerns about leaving gifts and leaving money to a disabled beneficiary or children. On the next slide, please. And and concerns about children inheriting too much too soon. So the answer to all of these concerns is to use a trust in the will, as I've set out on the next slide. And contrary to perception, trusts aren't just for the rich and famous. It's a very common and useful tool to make a gift, but with strings attached. So it allows flexibility and control as to how you provide the beneficiaries, and it allows the assets that are held in the trust to benefit a person, but without them having control over it. So I always wheel this next slide out, but these very people, as well as being ridiculously wealthy, all have something in common, and it's as those quotes say, it's their concern about having too much too soon. And they've spoken publicly about controlling their estate and setting trusts up either in their lifetimes or in their wills to make sure that money is there for their children or other beneficiaries, but it's provided for them in a very controlled manner. So these are different types of trusts that we would talk about if you came to us and we were giving you advice. So you can set up trusts in your lifetime, and we would advise you, we would set up a trust structure, and then you can pay money into that trust for the benefit of whoever you want, really, provided it's done in the right way. The gift of that amount into the trust would fall out of your estate after 7 years for inheritance tax purposes. But as we focused on wills, and this talk is about wills, there are usually 4 types of trusts that we have a look at when we're drafting wills, and they are life interest trusts, discretionary trusts, disabled beneficiary trusts, and nil rate band trusts. So life interest trusts, on the slide can go. Life interest trusts, usually we would use this for a married couple just because there are tax implications of using it in other circumstances. It can be used to safeguard a share of your house or any other assets for the benefit perhaps of your children, while also providing for your spouse. So for example, if a wife died and had a life interest trust over her property, her share of the property in her will, the husband could carry on living there for the rest of his days, but on his death, her share of the house would pass to the children. So if he remarried or if he needed care, her half of the house couldn't be taken into account. So it's really, really useful as a way of providing for your spouse or partner, but also making sure that there is something left in the pot for children, grandchildren in the future. Another type of trust that we use on the next slide is a discretionary trust. And these are very, very flexible. They allow trustees to manage the trust. Trustees have discretion as to how and when money is paid out and to whom, but you leave a letter of wishes setting out what your wishes would be. And usually you would pick trustees that you trust to follow your wishes. So these are some examples of when we'd advise you use a discretionary trust, is to pass wealth on to the next generation in a flexible way. If you have particularly complicated wishes, sometimes it's easier to put those into a discretionary trust rather than the body of the will. It helps pass wealth down generations without it being taxed at every generation, when every generation dies. If you had a large sum of money and put it in a trust now, that would stay there and last through the generations without it falling into individuals' estates. If you're not married, this is the alternative to that life interest trust. So it allows a surviving partner or spouse to benefit from assets that pass on first death while keeping the value of those assets outside of the survivor's estate. So it's really useful for inheritance tax purposes and also for unmarried couples. We use these trusts a lot if someone has business assets or agricultural property assets because they qualify for a certain type of inheritance tax relief. And this type of trust can be used for a disabled beneficiary because the concern there is wanting to provide for them, but making sure that any benefits and any care packages they have aren't affected by an inheritance tax, by an inheritance amount, sorry. And again, I mentioned nil rate band discretionary trusts. It's another form of discretionary trust, but it can only hold up to the current nil rate band, which is £325,000. Again, very useful for where business assets are involved. Some of you are very likely to have this type of trust in your will if you did it quite a few years ago. But we still use it for inheritance tax purposes as well. It helps prevent a large estate bunching in the hands of the surviving partner or surviving spouse. And then I think on the next slide, it just covers, I mentioned a letter of wishes. So when you do these types of wills incorporating discretionary trusts, especially, it's really important that you include a letter of wishes to sit alongside the will. The letter of wishes is confidential. It's not a public document. It's just addressed to your trustees. And we would advise you on what to include and what not to include. But it's important to be aware it's not legally binding. You are relying on your trustees to give effect to your wishes, but they do have discretion and they do have flexibility as to how they do that, which is a good thing or a bad thing. I'd finished on that bit, so that's fine. And then lastly, just to touch on something which I always advise on when talking about wills to clients is lasting powers of attorney. So lasting powers of attorney are completely separate documents to wills. They allow you to appoint somebody to manage your affairs and make decisions for you if you lost capacity to do that yourself. Even if you hold assets jointly, so as joint bank accounts, or if you own a property together and one partner loses capacity, the other will find it very, very difficult to access the bank account or deal with the property if a lasting power of attorney wasn't in place. Without a power of attorney, an application has to be made to the court for decisions to be able to be made on behalf of the person who's lost capacity. And it gets very complicated, it gets long and drawn out and expensive. So a lasting power of attorney is equally as important as a will, in my view, because with a will, you set out what happens when you die. Power of attorney, you're still alive, but you're not able to make decisions. So it's really important to have that in place. So I hope that was helpful. That was a whistle-stop tour of wills, powers of attorney and trusts. But in conclusion, our advice, as always, is don't put off making a will and don't put off reviewing an existing one. It doesn't have to be too difficult. Same with powers of attorney, make sure that they are in place, because it's really important that if you have bank accounts, if you have a property, if you have business assets, it's very important. And obviously our preference is that you seek specialist advice in relation to your will, because there's so many ways that it can go wrong and things aren't properly, so it's always worth speaking to a solicitor to get some professional advice on the preparation of it. There we go. And on the next slide, I've just set out our details. This is some of the team. So I primarily specialise in these matters, but I will be going on maternity leave at the end of this week. So my colleagues Claire and Esther and Claire Johnson, who's the partner who heads up the department, they will be on hand to contact and discuss further.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. That was really interesting and informative. I found it, brilliant. So I'm sure everybody else did as well. We have received quite a large number of questions, and I know you're kindly going to answer as many as possible. Yeah. Apologies, everybody, if we do run out of time, but Geldards have really kindly offered everybody who attends the webinar a free 30-minute phone consultation. So if we're not able to answer your query now, all of those details will be included in the post-event email. So I'll go straight in with one of those. It's how is social distancing affecting wills and getting them witnessed by a third party?
We haven't found it too much of a problem, to be honest. Usually our usual practice would have been to meet face to face and have a meeting and then prepare wills and invite our clients back into the office to sign them. And obviously that's not possible really at the moment. But we've been using Zoom and video calls to take instructions and meet with clients, and have then done the same in terms of signing. We have tended to send the wills out to clients to sign with instructions, and provided they're happy to ask, neighbours over the garden wall or a couple of friends to pop by the front door, it hasn't proved too much of a problem. There have been guidelines issued for virtual signing. Yeah, it's not something that we are particularly keen on doing. It can open up some problems later down the line if the will is challenged, and so our policy has been to still keep it face to face, and if socially distanced, then yeah, I've gone and sat in a few gardens and signed wills even in this weather. So it hasn't proved too much of a problem. So I wouldn't let that put anyone off doing a will at the moment.
Okay, lovely. We've had another one in. How often should we review our wills?
I always say it's worth giving it a thought every 5 years or so. But then major life events are, if you have children, if you retire, if budget changes and the rules around inheritance tax change, we write out to our clients on a rolling basis that usually every 3 to 4 years, to invite them to, or as a reminder, to review their will and get in touch with us. But in the meantime, people marry, people divorce, and things change. So anytime that there's a kind of material change in your circumstances, it's always worth reviewing then. And quite often I'll have a call from a client and say, oh, this has happened. Do I need to come in, or do I need to see you and review the will? And it's quite often a case of a simple, yes, we do need to have a chat about it, or no, it's fine, it still does what you want it to do.
Lovely. We've had another one in. You can set up a lasting power of attorney in advance of it being needed.
Yes, and that is the best thing to do, really, is to view them as a bit of an insurance policy, that you do them as soon as you can, because it's very important that you have capacity to prepare the power of attorney while you were able to. You can't prepare one for someone else. So, we quite often have phone calls saying, oh, mum's going downhill with dementia and I need to be her attorney. By that point, it's too late. So the sooner you do them, the better. And then they are the kind of thing that you can just tuck away, and provided you're happy with who you've appointed as attorneys, you don't need to do anything with them until they need it then.
Are you able to give an idea of a cost of a basic will? Obviously people are worried it's quite expensive, but what a basic will would cost if you're able to?
Yeah, well, we work on a fixed fee basis, and it really, really depends on individual circumstances. So we will sit down and have an initial conversation, which, as you've mentioned, is free of charge, and set out the options then. Are very straightforward for a single will would usually start around £350 plus VAT. Simple, straightforward wills for a couple start around £500 plus VAT, but then anything more complicated with trusts and advice and letters of wishes, etc., is obviously more in depth and would be more expensive. But we always say, it's value for money, and people don't think twice about spending that on, a decorator or plumber or having things done. Yeah. So, or a pair of shoes. So, it's cheaper. Some people will say, oh, well, I can get a kit from WH Smith's for £20. And it's like, well, that's, there's risks involved in that can cost thousands of pounds later down the line if it's not done correctly. Yeah. So it's obviously, I would say, but it is worthwhile having the advice up front, because later down the line it can save a lot. Yeah.
Would life interest trust prevent the survivor selling the house?
No, not if it can be tailored. Usually it doesn't. The wills that I prepare, it allows the survivor to carry on living in the property, sell if they need to. The trust lifts up with the property and moves over to a new property, if needs be. So it does still offer the survivor some flexibility, but protects the capital at the same time.
Okay, lovely. And is there a way of protecting what you hand down to your children not being part of a divorce settlement if your child's relationship breaks down?
That's where trusts, putting a trust in the will would come in. And I think we'd need to give more specific advice to, an individual, but generally, if you want your children to benefit, but take it kind of outside of easy access, I guess, to them, then leaving it into a discretionary trust would be the answer to that.
Okay, lovely. I've got a few more. I'm just conscious
Yeah,
of time as
no.
well. But when naming executors, do you have to have proof of their permission?
No. It's usually a good idea to discuss it with them first. But you don't have to have proof. You can pick who you want to pick. The key thing is picking people you trust.
Do you have to pay for will storage?
Not with us. We don't charge for storage. Some firms do, some banks do if you've prepared a will through a bank, but we don't charge for our storage.
Okay, so it'd just be, I guess, based on where your will
Yeah.
was then, yeah. So we've had another one in. Somebody's partner has enduring power of attorney from 2006. Are these still valid and the addresses are now out of date? Would that be sufficient?
The address isn't too much of a concern. Enduring powers of attorney are still valid, and but you can't prepare them anymore because lasting powers of attorney have taken over from them. Enduring powers of attorney work in a slightly different way in that they only get registered to be valid, used validly, when someone starts losing capacity. So they work in a slightly different way to powers of attorney. It's worth reviewing. So if that person wants to get in touch and have a chat about the pros and cons of enduring powers of attorney versus preparing new ones, it'd be worth having a chat and taking advice.
Okay, lovely. We've got someone who's planning to retire to Spain. Is there anything to think about in terms of writing a will?
It depends. With a will, the best thing you can do is kind of prepare it on your current circumstances, and that's where reviewing it as things change, that's the important bit. It depends what they have in Spain. If they buy a property, they'd be better off speaking to a Spanish specialist lawyer to discuss whether they need a will in Spain. A British will or UK will can cover worldwide assets, but sometimes that's not the best way to kind of organise things. So we always say with any foreign assets, or if someone has got assets in different jurisdictions, we can provide advice on the UK side, but we would usually say to get a better and fuller picture and make sure everything joins up together, it's important to take advice up from the jurisdictions as well in which you own those assets.
Yeah, I think we've probably just got time for one or two more.
Yeah.
Somebody's asked, if both she and her husband died, what would happen to their children without a will in place in terms of who would look after them? They've delayed preparing a will at the moment as they can't decide who would best be placed as appropriate guardians, but are worried about who, being irresponsible.
Yeah, it would either be down to the family to decide, which can create probably more difficulties if people are disagreeing. The executors don't really, if they're not family members, don't have much of a say. It can lead to, local authority and social services being involved if there's a disagreement. So it's actually better to put in a will who you want as guardians, bearing in mind guardians don't necessarily, the children don't have to live with them. The guardians are responsible for making decisions. So a guardian could decide, well, it's better for the children to live with, this family member or the grandparents or whoever else. Just because you name someone as guardians doesn't mean that you're kind of handing the children over to them and they live with them and they take full responsibility. It's not that. It's the guardians have the responsibility of making decisions in the best interest of the children.
Okay.
So if that makes it a bit easier to decide.
Yeah. And how old would a child be before they could sort of decide themselves?
Well, legally 18. So a guardian's in place till they're 18. The older the child is, the more say they have and will be taken into account. but legally up to 18, a guardian will be responsible for making decisions for that child.
Okay, that's lovely. Unfortunately, I think that's sort of all we have time for in terms of questions. But again, thank you to everybody who submitted in advance. And thank you to Laura and Geldards for taking the time to present today, and to everyone who's joined this webinar. I really hope you enjoyed it. At Cardiff University, we are incredibly lucky to have received some really generous gifts in wills, and I'd be more than happy to talk to any of you firsthand if you are in a position to include a gift to charity in your will. This type of giving makes really a truly incredible difference, and the legacies that we have already received have enabled us to do extraordinary things, such as helping students face hardships, fund life-saving equipment, and several of our researchers are currently funded by legacies, so I can tell you firsthand the difference that they make. There are so many options, and as a charity we would really love you to consider, if you are including a gift in your will to charity, to think of Cardiff University. Pop me an email, drop me a line. I'm more than happy to set up a call, and it'd be lovely to talk to you. So we do also have some great webinars coming up, which we will send details of post-event and on our social channels, so do keep an eye out. Thank you again, Laura, and thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today, and have a lovely rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.